Hello and welcome to this week's blog on the social work theories and models. As you will have seen from the title, this week we're looking at models of social work, and they are models that speak about what social work is and what social work is for. I'm going to start by saying that social work is in many ways a non-obvious profession. And what I mean by that is if you ask people, what does a teacher do? If you ask them, what does a firefighter do? Or if you ask them what a nurse does, they will nearly always be able to give you a good explanation, a good description of what those professions do. But if you ask them what do social workers do, they often find that a lot more difficult to explain or describe what social work is and what social workers do, because the nature of the profession is not really obvious. And in many ways, we can see that part of the issue here is that social work serves many different people, and many different groups have an interest in what social work is or should be. So from a service user point of view or from a carer point of view, they may expect one thing from social work. Politicians, for example, local councillors who are responsible for the spending of public money through taxation, they may have a different view. The public may have another view. The media may have another view. Social workers often work alongside other services and they will have particular views about what social work is and what social workers should do. And then finally, social workers themselves have views on what social work is all about. And what you'll find is that often what those different groups want or what those different groups expect can be very different. And social work can easily get caught in the middle of that. And that's why we need to be able to articulate our own theories and models about what social work is for, hence the importance of models of social work. So in this video, I'm going to be very briefly exploring 4 models of social work. And I'm going to develop these a little bit in a historical sense, but also in terms of a political and a professional sense. So the first model is the therapeutic model of social work. The second is the radical model of social work. The third is the maintenance model of social work. And the fourth is the managerial model of social work. And we'll look at each of these in turn. So let's start with the therapeutic model. This is a model that developed out of a sense of compassion for the poor, the dispossessed, and those in society who were suffering. And we can see this is having various roots in charities, in Victorian era, in the work of Dickens, about, these are poor people who are suffering and society must do something about it. And we can see this developing through the work of Freud and a psychodynamic approach to people's problems, and the idea that people essentially had psychological and emotional problems. And the role of social work was to provide a corrective emotional experience, was to build relationships with people and help them develop the kind of psychological and emotional resources to deal with the challenges of life and become fully actualized people. And we can see various models of therapy being used in social work, whether that's person-centered or Gestalt, or psychodynamic theory or cognitive behavioral theories. There's all sorts of different theories that feed into this idea of the social worker as therapist. And that's really rooted in the therapeutic model of social work. At the same time as that therapeutic model was developing, there was also a second strand to social work, which was through various radical critiques of society, through, for example, Marxism and the structural critique of society and the idea that social workers had to challenge oppressive forces in society. So there was this overtly political model of social work, of community action, of helping people take on the forces in society through trade unionism, through direct action. And this developed through the 1960s and 1970s. There was a very strong kind of political sense of radical social work, developing through feminism, through critical race theory, through queer theory. Lots of models that sought to challenge the norms and standards of society that seem to skew society in favour of the dominant groups and to the disadvantage of oppressed groups. And so this was a very kind of political model of social work that saw social workers as revolutionary activists, not necessarily violent, but as people who went out there and changed society for the better, particularly for the people in society with the least power. And this was the radical model of social work. And then in the 1970s and the 1980s, a new model of social work began to develop, and this was the maintenance model. And this really came from a number of different sources, but particularly around research with service users about what they liked and disliked about social workers, and also around evidence into what worked in social work. And from this came the idea that social workers actually had a duty to help people manage in society. Not necessarily in a therapeutic sense, but to be able to work with people to help them fulfill their roles as parents, as tenants, or as consumers, or as good neighbours, or things like that. And from this came things like task-centred practice, which is very much around negotiating goals with people and practical problem solving, and a very strong sense of a role of social work around functionalist theory, that social workers were social engineers whose purpose was to help people fit in and do what they needed to do to cope in society. Then through the 1980s into the 1990s, there was a very strong reorganisation of social services in the UK, away from social workers as autonomous professionals who knew what they were doing and had the skills and knowledge to do it well, to the idea that social workers needed to be managed, that it was important for competition and performance management and results. And with this came the whole managerial model of social work, where social work now shifted from doing all the things that the other three models suggested to being target driven. So similar in some ways to the maintenance model, but much more about having set forms of assessment, set forms of intervention, that social workers were social administrators whose job was to ensure that the public's money was spent wisely and effectively and efficiently. And this was driven by various kind of models of management from business. So very much one of the words you may hear about this is neoliberalism, the kind of new liberal agenda of allowing the market to control things. So as before it had been, social work had been a profession, now social work was almost like a service industry that had to meet the needs of consumers and had to prove it was providing value for money. So as you listen through those four models of social work, what I'm guessing is you will find that you are particularly drawn to some of those models and switched off by some of the others. And this is quite important because one of the challenges that you're likely to face as a social worker is if you work in a service that's strongly oriented to one of those and yet that doesn't fit with you, you're going to find it very uncomfortable. So, for example, if you are quite practical, pragmatic, and not particularly political, and you find yourself working in a very radical organisation, you may find that you get switched off by the radicalism of that organisation. Equally, if you have a strong tendency towards a therapeutic model, to relationship building, to getting into the soft skills of social work and really connecting with people as individuals, and you're working for a very managerial service, again, you're going to find some tension between those different models that are pulling you in different directions. So hopefully being aware of that will give you some tools to deal with it and to think about how you can play to your strengths, play to the models of social work that appeal to you, and not get bogged down in things that are not really suitable for you. Reality is most social workers, at least some of the time, operate across all four models. And to be fair, each model of social work provides something useful. So don't think of one as good and one as bad or anything like that. They've all got a place. And hopefully across your career, you'll get a chance to develop skills in using all four models of social work. So thank you for watching and all the best.